Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to make ourselves a little planet and then eventually create ourselves a little star field, a nebula, and some other things that we're going to drag into Unreal. We'll do all of this over a couple videos. So starting off with the planet, obviously you can hand paint something, you can photo collage a bunch of different satellite imagery, or just take a chunk of something that looks like it kind of works for a planet. I'm choosing to take a chunk of a planet, which is our planet, obviously. And this is a good place to do it. It's free access, and it's worldview.earthdata.nasa.gov. And you can just find a location of the Earth. There's various different layers that you can turn on and off, but the default seems to work just fine. And the format, of course, is somewhat important, but as long as the quality is decent. And then this number, the smaller the number is, the more resolution it will apply to the image that it creates. And so I brought it down to 125 meters resolution per pixel, and that's brought me up to almost an 8K by 4K sort of chunk. When you click the download button, what's going to happen is it's going to show up over here, and you can then proceed to grab that and save that out. Now, this particular chunk of what I have here is not seamless. If I stick this on a sphere, it's not going to quite work. What I've done in Maya is I've created myself a sphere, and the sphere, the regular spheres will of course pinch at the top, and then of course you have this seam that you will have to fix, and the bottom will pinch as well, and it's also a huge seam. The one that I created is actually based on a different topology. It's using one of the new primitives, and so the end result, it doesn't have that pinching factor in the geometry, but it's never going to unwrap perfectly. So what I'm going to have to deal with is seams regardless. And the easiest way to deal with that on a 3D object, especially the kind of seams that I have in this particular case, is to take it into a 3D painting program. So that's what I did. So I took this and the sphere that I made in Maya and brought it across into Substance Painter. In Substance Painter, of course, I have seams. So if I just drag over here, you can see the seams that are created. Now, I've applied this simply by importing the object as is, and I created a new fill layer, and the fill layer I chose to pick the base color as the texture that I wanted. When I did the file new, I chose the sphere plus the texture that I had, the one that I just downloaded, so that it came in with me, and so it's showing up in the shelf. You just have to search for it. So I named mine Planet. Make sure that you name it something useful that you can easily access, and I just brought that into the fill layer. Then as a new layer, I went ahead and I switched to the Stencil Tool, and the Stencil Tool, the projection tool, of course will allow you to choose a color, and so I did. I went ahead and chose the base color, and you can actually turn this other stuff off. I don't really need it, but since I'm not painting anything else, it didn't really matter. I chose the base color there just by clicking and choosing it. So same as I did for the fill layer. Once these both have been chosen and you go in, ultimately it's just going ahead and rubbing in that stuff. One thing that I did change with this tool, of course, is using my pen stylus. I changed the pressure from stylus to the pressure for flow, and that way I was able to control and soften it at the edges. You can continue to touch this up further in something like Photoshop, where it's a little bit easier to see what's going on, but this did a fairly decent job of getting most of it done. Once I was done with that, the ideal thing, of course, was to switch over to the Bitmap Tool, which is another feature that comes with Substance. So I've got them on Steam here, and we just go ahead and launch that one. And when you first come into here, you of course have to set up your scene. So let's go with geometry, and you would go to load mesh and you would hunt down your mesh. I've got my planet already in here. That's it right there. And of course I need the image, and so the image is what I saved out. Base color. I'll drop that in there, and then we'll load that as the main input. When you bring it in as the main input, of course there's going to be a number of things that it's going to do for you. It's going to start off at 512. We're going to bump that up to 1024, but we're going to export a 4K version because that's closer to what I'm looking at. And we have under the advanced, outputs, we can go ahead and turn off roughness and metallic, keep the base color, normal, height, and we're going to turn off ambient occlusion, which is darkening that region in there. That's just going to give me 3 maps that I'm going to be interested in. It's going to export more than that, but that's going to give me the basics. We then of course go into the relief tab, and you can start playing with your different frequencies to try and get better results, things that you like better as a result for this planet. So I'm just right mouse buttoning and dragging in here. I could also use the wheel mouse, and the left mouse button just orbits. I've just got the base lighting on here, and it looks okay, but there's things I want to change. High frequency will give you more detail in the sharper regions, and I can reduce, say, the medium stuff if I wanted to. Really low frequency is the big bulges. So you could do something like that, and then take that normal intensity way down. So you're getting some detail on that planet. And I can add more detail inside of Photoshop using additional normal maps. So you're only going to get so much from the actual image. If the image has lots of detail, you'll get lots of detail from it. That's just the way this works. But if you don't have a lot of detail, it's not going to give you much. So of course you take that and you export the bitmap, and you choose the location. Make sure to choose which maps you want and which ones you don't. Even though you've got this here, there's still going to be more choices that will come up when you do the export bitmap. So I exported that out, and I got a series of images which I brought into Photoshop. So this is what the original one looks like, and of course I brought my other maps in. I'm just going to shut that off for a moment. So I've got the image where all the seams are now fixed, the normal map that I got from B2M, and I also had a height map that I chose to keep. And the height map allowed me to separate the lower region and the higher region from what I was working with. And so what I did with that is I chose a neutral color, so basically this color, which is 127, 127, and 255. So that's what flat is in the tangent space normal maps. And I have 2 areas of control. So I filled the white area with that color and the black area with that color in 2 separate things. And so what we have here is the lower region is getting more of this flatness, and the higher region is allowed to keep some of its detail. And what I did is put over top of it another layer of noise. So if we get in closer, and this is basically like just a stucco pattern kind of deal, and the stucco pattern is just adding more surface noise to this, and I'll have to determine how much of it I need, but essentially just set that as overlay and then just control how much you think you want of it. Too much and you can end up with a twinkling image, so a little bit will bring out, you know, a little bit of texture where you might need it. I could have probably used maybe some larger detailed stuff, but we'll try this out and see how it works. So all I really need is the normal map and the color map, which have been produced. So the next step from here is, of course, taking it into I guess Unreal and playing with it a bit in there to see what it looks like. Okay, so here we're in Unreal, and I've got the planet in here, and I've got a planet shader, and I've got the two textures that are dragged in, so just kind of drag and drop. And just bring this over here. I've got the shader loaded, I plug this in. In order to get this here, I switched to this, but you have to have the planet selected in order to be able to switch to that geometry. So this is the actual geometry that it's going to be on, so that I can check that, because if I switch to this, which is a little bit bigger, but it also has different UVs, which shows all the weird stretching and business. So, so we can go back to the planet, the real deal here, and we're going to check this out. So first off, there's a few things I don't want, obviously. So I'm just going to go 0 on specular and metallic. And that's going to make sure that this is primarily diffuse in appearance. If at some point I do want highlights, I can. If I wanted a planet that had water system, then I would do a map where I would create a specific specular area that would then give me those highlights where the water was. But this is not it, so we're just going to continue with this. Looks like the normal map has worked out fine, even with the slightly noisy elements there, so that's just fine. So I want to add a few other features to this in order to get it to work nicely. So I'm just going to right click and say Fresnel, and we're going to get a Fresnel utility here. I'm going to create an add and hit 3. And we're going to choose very light sky color. I haven't even done anything to the shader, and it thinks that it needs to start rebuilding it, so it's kind of freaking out, and my graphics card is going crazy. So let's just continue along here. We're gonna multiply these. Actually, this should be a multiplication going into here, and this should be the add. There we go. And we'll plug that directly in. So I've got the Fresnel on there, and that Fresnel is not going to work for me, so I'm going to see if I can mess with it here. That. Okay, so clearly that's not going to work. So we're going to do it a different way. I'm going to do WS, and let's try this. Vector normal, and we'll plug that one in. And that's perfect. So that's going to give me what I want. I just want it to grow on a planet, but I don't want it to use the shape of the normal map to add the details. So that's just going to give me sort of like the illusion of an atmosphere. So we're going to save this out and see what that looks like for now. So in Engine, this is what it looks like with the lighting that's here, which is pretty decent. I could probably expand that atmosphere a little bit further, so that's just playing with the Fresnel settings, and it looks pretty cool. So this has to go out past the rim here so that I can get a true sense of it out there. And the main reason for using something like this is that I can actually rotate the planet. So I can take it and have it rotate slowly if I wanted to. Otherwise, there isn't any real benefit to this being 3D. I can actually go ahead and make it a card because it's going to be so far out there anyways in terms of the scale of where it's supposed to be that I shouldn't be able to see it in perspective either in the viewport or in a VR headset. So it's really up to you to determine what you want to do with it. So if I want a slow rotation of the planet's texture, then having it on a true 3D object is more ideal. So I've gone into the Fresnel here and I changed the base reflection to 0 so it's not influencing any of the center area, and the exponent to 2 instead of 5, so that's expanded it out further. It looks a little bit more extreme here than it will in the viewport because, again, of the lighting. So there we have it there. That's kind of working, at least for the main part. I could try playing with some things here. I could try and get this to maybe glow a little bit, but that's going to change how I want to use this exponent and other values. So I'm just going to play with some values and see if I can get something from this. Okay, so that was quick. It appears by multiplying this with another number, it affects the exponent so much that it just creates a thick bar here, which is not usable. So that's not a feasible way of adding any atmospheric glow to it, which I was looking to try and do from this edge here. So there are some things that I can still try in order to make this a little bit more interesting, but I think really just sticking a card through this with a fake glow with the orientation that I want is going to work just as good and will serve the purpose that I need. So I think that's what I'll end up doing. I'm just going to drag this out past the atmosphere and see what that looks like. Okay, so that looks fairly decent actually, as is. Settle that in just low enough so that I can see it basically touching the atmosphere that's existing here, and that is plenty. So we've got a star field and some nebula stuff out there to make it a little bit more interesting, and we'll see where that goes. So back over here in Photoshop, we're just going to go ahead and add some blackness here. We'll go with some filter and noise and add noise. We're going to do a Gaussian monochromatic, and we'll just let that go in there. Now for this next step, I have to make sure that I'm at 100%. This is a 4K image, so I'm going to have to zoom in quite a bit in order to get there. I'm going to do a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I'm going to take that up a bit more. And then we're going to do image adjustments levels. I'm going to find that sweet point in there, which is going to give me my star field. Now, too many stars, of course, are going to be a problem, so make sure that you have just the right amount. So this looks relatively decent. So I'm going to make use of this on my lovely little sphere there and see what happens. So for this mesh, I brought it in inside out. It's just a copy of the planet. And I took my shader and I set it to unlit. And then I just plugged the star texture into the emissive color and then save that out. So what I've got here now is a vast area of stars, which I just have to make a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to get up and take that planet and we're going to make it, let's try 100 times bigger. See what that buys us. How about 500? And now if we look around, we've got a bunch of stars. Now, if the stars aren't big enough, all we have to do is go back to our shader here, and we can go into this puppy here. I'm going to go texture coordinates. There we go. Put that into there, and in the texture coordinates, we'll go, how about 4 by 4. And save that out. And what that should do is it should make them much nicer. So the only thing that we have to watch out for are the seams that will come from that. And so that's something that has to be corrected inside of Photoshop. You're just going to have to go in and offset that and then fix that border. But otherwise, looks like they're about the right size. I've got my planet rocket in there. And so the only thing left to do is a nebula, and we're going to save that for a separate video.